Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Hershey, and I serve as Housing California's Executive Director. I'm excited to build off all of the great sessions that came before and the governor's press conference at noon. I'm also honored to welcome you all into my home for our kitchen table talk with Governor Newsom. Thank you, Governor Newsom, for spending time with us, particularly during an especially busy moment that demands a lot from our leaders. We chose this format of a kitchen table talk so you and I could virtually sit down with all of our participants and share a beverage and a moment for real conversation. I'm going to ask our audience to grab their favorite afternoon drink and snack, pull up a chair, and lean into this kitchen table talk with the governor and me. Okay, Governor Newsom, here we go. Before we get started, I'm going to ask you a really personal question. Are you ready?
Bring it on. Bring it on.
All right. What is your beverage of choice for today's conversation?
Well, you should ask me what should it have been, depending on how it goes. But maybe this is a sort of, set the tone of expectation. Green tea. Does that work?
That works beautifully. I heard your voice during your press conference is now a little hoarse, so I'm really happy.
That was the coffee voice, afternoon green tea voice.
All right, beautiful, beautiful. Maybe a little honey and lemon?
Oh.
Okay, great.
When we talk about the legislature, always honey and lemon.
Understood. Sweet, so sweet. Well, I wanted to drink a highly caffeinated cold brew today, but my communications people told me I couldn't because it would hype me up even further, and I'm already really high energy and I'd get dry mouth. So I'm going to stick with water in a wine glass. We can fantasize about your green tea and we'll move forward from there. Your team promised me that there you go, you're good to go. All right, moving on. Our theme for the conference this year is Our Homes, Our Voice, Our California. Owning the past, transforming the future. We spent Monday really deep diving into the racial justice and setting the course for the rest of our unconference, designed to learn from what was, assess what is, and center people and racial justice in transforming the future. As James Baldwin, a renowned author, philosopher, and civil rights leader noted, history is not past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. If we pretend otherwise, we are literally criminals. In this country, we are always in such a hurry to focus on the future that we really take a moment to pause and acknowledge our past struggles as well as celebrate our successes. Together, I believe we have begun to face some of these challenges, and we've also accomplished unprecedented successes. So I want to take this moment with you and with all our audience who's sitting at the table with us to acknowledge the progress we've really made over the last several years. In 2017, when you were working locally, we had our biggest legislative package in the history of affordable housing and homelessness. In 2018, along with our partners and many others, we co-led successful Proposition 1 and Proposition 2, which resulted in $6 billion of bonds for affordable housing and supportive housing and leveraged another $23 billion. And you were elected governor. I don't know if you remember, but you actually came to our 2018 conference and were part of our gubernatorial candidate forum.
I remember.
The highlight of the year for you, right?
Well, it was actually a good conference. I liked the energy in the room. I remember it honestly, like it was yesterday.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So good to hear. I hope you can have the same feeling. Just remember it because it's all around you in our audience today.
I see everybody's faces out there.
There you go. Just imagine. In 2019, we had our biggest budgetary investments truly in the history, as long as I've been in public policy, which is 30 plus years, but perhaps in the history of California towards homelessness and affordable housing. And then you came into 2020, you were so clear-eyed, and you had that bold vision to address homelessness and increase housing production. And that truly brought joy to our hearts. I know you referenced it again during your press conference that is your commitment. You have taken such a bold leadership role, and we're so grateful to you for that. And we recognize that even with the challenges that have happened in the light of the public health crises we face, and there are several of them before us, you dedicated $500 million to the low-income tax credit program, despite the $54 billion budget shortfall. You dedicated over $1 billion to address homelessness, and you started our first in the nation Project Room Key with dedicated resources to protect Californians experiencing homelessness, and then transition that in such an exciting way to Project Home Key to provide housing opportunities to the first in the nation. And I know you're going to tell us more in a minute about those. Of course, we know we came into this year already facing incredible challenges to provide housing for our Californians, particularly our Black, Brown, and Indigenous people who are already struggling to make ends meet even before the current challenges. Now we're seeking ways to address these needs and support a sense of dignity for all Californians while working against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, profound moments recognizing racial injustice, and wildfires across the state. At the start of the week, we faced a potential eviction tsunami cliff, and millions of renters were looking to us, counting on us for solutions to keep them safe and secure. We recognized you worked really closely with the legislature to produce and then sign AB 3088 on Monday night, the day before the eviction ban was set to expire. And we know, although there was bipartisan support and a lot of alignment, this is seen kind of as a stopgap. You've committed, the legislature has committed to sit down together and hopefully with all of us to think about the longer term solutions, the other solutions we need right now, as well as for the long game that will protect tenants, small landlords, and affordable housing providers. And we look forward to continuing to sit at that table that we started today and will continue heretofore. And truly, at Housing California, we're here today because we believe we can create positive change. We're especially interested in hearing about your vision and specific action steps that make these challenges work and seem possible to accomplish together. So here we go. Let's dive in. Here's your warm-up question. Well, you kind of got that with your drink question, so here's your warm-up. Even before you became governor, you had long been a leader on housing and homelessness. What did you learn during your time as a supervisor and mayor that has influenced your policies around housing and homelessness? This is a twofer. And since you became governor, has anything changed? Have you learned new things and changed your philosophy?
It's a good question because we've been at this for a long time. My role as a county supervisor in San Francisco, as a county mayor, and I distinguish not just as a city mayor, but a county mayor as well. We've been at this for decades, and we have seen success. We've obviously fallen short of our own expectations and certainly other people's expectations. But I think the one constant, the one thing that I reflect upon is something you brought up in terms of this sense of urgency, this sort of need to develop a mindset for the moment. And that is that we wildly overestimate what we can do in this space in a year, but we wildly underestimate what we're capable of doing in 5, 10, 15 years. And I think that's a sobering mindset, but also an optimistic mindset that I sort of learned the hard way through trial and error for decades now, being at this. And so while it's right to fixate on the last legislative session, what could have, should have happened, I think our mindset must be a more sustainable frame, a framework that really focuses on the future and the future that all of us have to design and develop, because clearly the future of California is not being equally shared. That's pre-pandemic. It's been exposed in this pandemic. I appreciate the requisite point you make in terms of the equity lens, the racial lens, particularly as it relates to issues of housing and homelessness. And it's right to bring into this conversation as a baseline, but it's also right for us to recognize that we have an enormous amount of responsibility, because if we don't get this question of what the hell to do about homelessness and housing, the issue of affordability, fundamentally, then the California dream is in real peril. I know it's rote and cliched. I know that's probably been shared by a dozen governors, and certainly every advocate that ever gets up on stage says similar words. But I really think at this moment, tremendous disparity, concentration of income, concentration of wealth, those disparities now broke open in this pandemic, and the anxiety and fear that now stacked on top of all of this, that we have a real responsibility to figure this out in ways that disrupt the status quo and disrupt our previous thinking.
Thank you. Totally agree. So let's talk about what's now. Let's examine, and she just noted everyone wants to focus on what's happening right now, and you're gonna see from my broader questions, I'm very interested in what's next and what's far into the future. So really happy to see you start from there. But let's examine this legislative year. You, like I said, you came into it with a clear vision, a budget surplus, a continued commitment to addressing homelessness and increasing the affordable housing supply. And unfortunately, 2020 has proven to be both ever-changing and overwhelming. And yet it's also led to some transformative changes. What do you see as your major achievements made so far this year?
Well, I think the biggest achievement is that when we have to, we can do big things. We can work across our differences. We can come around the table and actually get something done. Look, I'm not naive. No one's naive, and certainly read all the punditry on this and didn't need to read it to know it, because it was well expressed across the table. But just on this tenant protection bill and addressing the issue of forbearance, small landlords, it was a stopgap measure. But the fact was, a lot of that took shape, and the reason we were able to get that accomplished was because of the work we did the previous year on 1482, and the fact that many of the same folks came around the table, worked across their differences on the just cause language, on the rent gouging language that was really, set a precedent in many respects in this nation. It was a point of pride to not only sign that legislation, to be part of that process, to work with many of the same legislative leaders and same advocates to get this stopgap measure done. It's just an indication to me, a point of indication of a framework of opportunity moving forward, that if we take that same mindset and we move away from the stale debates about, there's the alphabet soup of people that are for these things, against these things, have killed these things in the past. And, if we could just move beyond that and have that mindset that we truly are all in this together, and we've got a responsibility to one another to figure this damn thing out. Business community has an imperative to address the issue of affordability so they can be more competitive. Big landlords have responsibility because they can't thrive in a world that's failing, which means they have to have tenants in a middle class that's growing and vibrant and thriving, and tenants themselves need support, stability, and some predictability to advance the same. And at the end of the day, you can't do everything with a scarcity mindset. We got to bring back an abundance mindset, which means we have to build more damn housing. We have to disabuse ourselves that we're incapable of that. And that's focusing on common sense, which is density, and focusing on transit corridors, and bringing to light all of these variables of focus that I think we all are aligned on, which is a low carbon, green growth future with a sustainable mindset that has Mother Nature, not just the markets in our mind. And so, look, I'm optimistic in that respect. Situationally, I was really proud of the work we did on Project Room Key. I mean, the fact is, on April, that was pen to paper an idea, and 22,000 human beings are testament that we can increase by 50% our capacity in literally months, 50% our capacity to get people off the streets and into some housing, to take that mindset and then move it with now a sense of permanency, Project Home Key, where we can leverage federal dollars and do something no other state could have imagined doing. And that's sort of anchoring that consciousness into doing something permanent on hotel motel conversions, and really looking to expedite and fast track some of these ideals and create some energy at the local level, where now you have local assembly members, and not just assembly members, you have local councils that are having 3-2 votes on whether or not you support homeless housing in your community or opposed to it. Meaning we're creating a dialectic. We're forcing the conversation anew. Now over, I think it's 138 different applications have come in on Project Home Key, which is just extraordinary, 67 jurisdictions, all of that happening in real time. So, those are examples of not just a mindset that I think was advanced this year, where we took the sense of urgency and we came together across differences, but moreover, some specific proposals that crossed the finish line that got done, which proves the paradigm what we're capable of doing.
Yes, I think you spoke beautifully to those transformative opportunities and the political will and public support really building for us to take action. So really appreciate seeing that. Getting folks off the streets and into a home and then moving towards permanent solutions are so key to the success of California. So I'm going to take, oh, go ahead.
But I also think something else happened, and it didn't get a lot of attention when it happened, but happened in the earlier part of this year. We started to see the corporate community step up. And I know, it's California, it's not good enough. And, some people were critical that they didn't do more. The fact is, billions and billions of dollars was contributed by some well-known corporate brands that actually contributed and leveraged our tax credit programs. Thank you for starting this out, reminding where we were a year ago. We put a historic amount of money, $1 billion in tax credits. I campaigned on that. People say, well, there's been efforts in the past, legislative bills to increase from 43 million, 85 million, some of those tax credit programs, and move the AMI up. We actually delivered that, $1 billion. We put in those two buckets in that first year. And now using corporate dollars, philanthropic dollars to start leveraging some of those tax credits as well, particularly with some of the anxiety happening with the federal tax reforms. Some of the efforts as well to regionalize partnerships so there's more accountability and transparency in that same space. So there's something happening here, not just the 18 bills that we passed last year, and great work, thank you, you did, Governor Brown did, the legislature, and coming out of 17 and 18. Last 3 or 4 years, recognition on homelessness for the first time ever that the state has to actually do something on this damn issue, and not just as a former mayor and county supervisor, just require the counties and cities to do that work. I think there's new energy now of expectation, new partnerships, public-private, new partnerships with the state and counties, and new accountability with cities. Those 47 cities we put on notice, all but 17 now have come into compliance that we mean business about the housing element. We're going to get aggressive on these RENA goals. Just ask my friends at SCAG. I see you out there. I know you weren't happy with us, but I wasn't happy with just 430,000 units. You were able to do more, and you tripled that to 1.3 million. We got this 6th RENA cycle coming up. This is our opportunity to mark momentum and expectation. So we're moving in this direction, and I think a very positive way. And so I forgive me for extending on your question, but I thought it was important to talk about some of that momentum that also carried in to this very challenging year that we're currently experiencing, 2020.
Well, I appreciate your energy, and at Housing California, we believe this is the moment to advance the movement, and that momentum and energy is key and core. And I also really appreciate how you are reframing through a perspective of abundance and everyone in to win. We are right there with you, that it's going to take the collective will, and it has been building, and we need to continue to move forward on that. So with that in mind, we think about, at Housing California, we talk about think, act, and do business differently. So I'm going to offer you the opportunity to think about that question. Our state has a reputation for innovative, bold thinking. And yet we've really struggled to put that visionary thinking to work to address homelessness, and instead of kind of taking a piecemeal approach. At this historic moment in time, with the combined challenges facing Californians, if we are dreaming big, they asked in the last panel, if you had a magic wand, what are those dreams, and how do we transfer those dreams into large-scale, concrete policy solutions that will end homelessness and create homes for all?
Well, I said it a little bit today. I've said it 100 times. I said it during that candidates forum a year and a half ago. My bias is expressed in the simple phrase that shelter solves sleep, housing and supportive services solve homelessness. You want to get serious about solving the issue, you got to get serious about housing opportunities and create that stability where people can address the reason they were out in the streets and sidewalks in the first place, or on a neighbor's couch, or in an RV. And that fundamentally has to be our mantra, housing first mantra, direct access to housing mantra. I'm not very interested in managing the problem, failing more efficiently. I believe in just directly addressing the fundamental issue of affordability head on, and it relates to the issue of homelessness. Now, that said, I'll tell you, just, preparation met opportunity this year as it relates to this pandemic. We, in the past, were working with the counties, working with the cities, working with some of our regional agencies, and frankly, there was a stubborn push-pull about, well, we got to continue to support our continuums of care, continue to, do a little bit here, more here, do more here, and I really wanted to push this thrust on hotel-motel conversions and modular, tiny innovation, stress a focus on creating more assets of opportunity, and that was stubborn. The $650 million we put up last year, which was unprecedented for this HEAP and the previous HOPE money, a lot of it went a lot of places. But now we were able to, working with the legislature, to their credit, really focus in that $600 million to target this housing first framework, to build assets and to connect all these counties. 55 counties, by the way, participated in Project Roomkey. 55 of the 58 people stepped up, and to spread those opportunities and anchor with the new CEQA streamlining that was part of the trailer bill that didn't get snuck in but wasn't discussed, and some of the zoning compliance that is part of Project Homekey that also will help advance these efforts. This, I think, is an accelerant. It's not everything, but it's an anchor. And so for me, you talk about a magic wand, my dream, it's about manifesting and realizing what we are promoting and what we collaboratively work together with the legislature this year, and now getting the counties to really follow through by the end of this calendar year. I love that it's the end of this calendar year. We got to spend this money and get these assets online. And I think that's a framework of focus that demonstrably can create units, create opportunities, create points of transition to get people back on their feet. And so I want more of that and less of, with all due respect, the 1,001 wonderful ideas that got us in this damn place in the first place.
So part of this was redevelopment going away, right? That got us in this damn situation because we lost the resources for production. Do you have a sense for how we're going to continue to commit dollars to production and what we need in this state?
Yeah, well, look, the state of California is never going to subsidize what the private sector needs to provide as it relates to the capital to construct the 3.5 million plus units, plus units that are needed to create some price stability and equilibrium in terms of the supply-demand imbalance in the state of California. But we have a responsibility to create the conditions, create greater sense of certainty where people aren't putting up a lot of capital to put up at risk. And there's been a lot of progress in that place. Skinner's bill last year in terms of helping, create a completion process where there are not a lot of surprises near the end in terms of changing zoning and changing rules and regulations. The obvious work we want to do and continue to work with Scott Wiener and others to what's the iterative version of the SB 50 framework and goal, and obviously the work that Pro Tem was advancing a housing package, a bunch of bills that were well conceived, well thought out. And by the way, none of that was lost. All that work is done. All that work we're all the beneficiary of, just because it fell short of quite literally of whatever happened at the last minute there, quite literally midnight on Monday night, doesn't mean we can't pick up right off where a lot of those bills were left off. I think we've got to create that mindset, creating conditions where we can invite more capital investment, private sector, and then what is a version of redevelopment 2.0 that doesn't cost our kids by diluting Prop 98 guarantee, doesn't cost the general fund by taking money away from, ironically, some of our homeless programs to subsidize and backfill the costs of those contributions in terms of the increment. EIFDs, we did a lot on that by getting rid of that 2/3 requirement or 55% requirement on the vote, so we can start doing some increments so it's not just Truckee and whatever else we were doing a few of the IFDs, move that, push that, promote that further. But look, there's no doubt our tax credit programs, no doubt private sector's responsibility to do more in terms of incentivizing and helping us with the missing middle, workforce housing, and that financing in that 120 plus AMI range, and how critical it is to find that financing. We need to do more. Obviously, the bonds are a part of this, and clearly, I'm all ears on advancing something as relates to redevelopment that is not a $2.2 billion price tag that we have to find by offsetting or cutting programs that otherwise are well conceived and priorities for all of us.
Great. And I'm going to pivot back at with our last question. I have an in-between question. I'm excited to dive in a little bit deeper with you on that because we're very interested through our Roadmap Home initiative to explore that with you all and have been working with the administration. But first of all, we know, I just asked questions about dollars, and we know that dollars are only part of the solution. And we also know that we need a single state level champion committed to addressing homelessness and housing affordability. You've advocated for a czar on homelessness, and there just happens to be a bill this year that's on your desk, AB 1845, carried by Assemblywoman Luz Rivas, that's sponsored by our partner, Corporation for Supportive Housing and us, that would create a cabinet level secretary to report to you on homelessness. You've really spoken to the need to move forward very boldly. This bill does have bipartisan support. And it was recommended by your council, the Governor's Council on Regional Homeless Advisors, was supported by the big city mayors, including an op-ed by Mayor Tubbs and Mayor Schaaf, urging signature on this legislation that just came out today, I believe. And we've taken amendments from all of your departments and agencies to make the implementation smoother. It costs very little, and we believe it would create enormous cost savings that by leading to efficiencies in our systems and agencies be able to coordinate better. And finally, I'll just note, it will institutionalize innovations that you have elevated in bringing homelessness forward.
I appreciate the advocacy. I've got almost 400 bills I'm looking at. I already have a homeless czar. His name's Jason Elliott. I already have prioritized this issue across agencies, and respectfully and lovingly, we don't need a bill to talk about data. We're moving forward the HEIS system and addressing some of the HMIS issues. We already were doing that through the budget process. We have got Gustavo there at HCD, who's really dynamic and committed to talk about the issues of equity, is leading those efforts. Lourdes, who I brought in with a framework deeply committed to the cause of homelessness and housing and addressing all the reforms we need with the TCACs and the SIDLACs and all of the other financing agencies. I'm deeply committed to this cause myself, so being advised, I'm also advising. I took the responsibility, sort of tongue-in-cheek, to be the czar myself, even though Jason's responsibility is more formal in that role. Every agency in state government is held to account, not just one advisor on the issue of housing and homelessness, top two priorities of this administration. And by the way, if you didn't believe that, I hope you go back to my State of the State. The entire State of the State, just a few months ago, was on the issue of housing and homelessness. And nothing that we advanced in that State of the State we're walking away from. We obviously had to set aside our ambitions on the CalAIM proposal, which is a foundational issue around the issues of homelessness, even more broadly, on focusing on the integration of brain health and physical health. That fundamental integration is the reason we brought Mark Galley to be the HHS secretary, not to be there with me talking about COVID every Tuesday at noon, but to focus on the issue of this CalAIM proposal, which we're fully committed to. $695 million proposal. We're going to make another stab at it. So all of these things are part of the integration that are ongoing. And we are committed to, regardless of one specific bill. This commitment includes, by the way, conservatorships, includes some of the work that Daryl Steinberg and Mark Ridley Thomas, to their credit, my advisors that you were referencing on this homelessness task force, have been advancing. Prop 63 reform, which we're also committed to, drawing down some of those reserve money, which I know sends shivers to 62 people watching, but to 6,000 of us paying attention, this is something long overdue. All of that, we're moving, and I'll look forward to seeing where we move on these bills.
So I appreciate your feedback. I'm really impressed with the folks that you've hired. We're working very, very closely with all of them and see a lot of opportunity. Look forward to re-exploring this with you as you move forward with your 400 signings of bills and what's there, and just appreciate the challenge that you're up against and look forward to continuing that conversation. But I'm also sensitive to the time we have left, and I want to make sure we get to the last question. We've got 540 folks on and 7 questions in the Q&A that I can see, or more questions than that. So we'll see if we get to it. I'm going to ask you my last question, and then we'll see if we have a moment for other folks to weigh in. So as you've heard, Housing California, together with the California Housing Partnership, is collaborating with researchers, resident leaders, and other advocates and experts from essential sectors across the state to draw up California's Roadmap Home 2030. The Roadmap Home provides a 10-year strategic vision and a blueprint with a framework of evidence-based solutions designed to holistically address California's housing and homelessness challenge and move us towards a California with homes, health, and prosperity for all. We're looking forward to working with your office, the broader administration, and the legislature on finalizing and advancing the roadmap. What kind of solutions do you think are essential to see in a comprehensive bold plan like the Roadmap Home? And I'll just note, you referenced some of those before, and I also want to note that I've really appreciated your administration. We've met with Tia, we've met with many people from agency and Gustavo, Jason and Mark Tollefson, and they've all been incredibly helpful in the development. So want to make sure that we're doing this together, and it does have a 10-year strategic vision, and we're working on that blueprint to get there, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.
We're all in, and demonstrably so by the examples of the 4 individuals you've already engaged with, that all 4 have talked to me about this and reminded me to express to you my gratitude and appreciation for the work that you're promoting, the work that's well underway, the work that you're actually doing. And so in every way, shape, or form, we're all in, and we want to be part of designing that, but in real time. And what I mean by that is the sense of urgency that we all have. I appreciate big, hairy, audacious goals. I appreciate having a sort of a date with proverbial destiny in terms of reaching those goals, or at least seeing how far we can go in achieving those goals, which, by the way, to me, is one of the goals in life's great purposes. Oftentimes, if you have stretch goals, it's not about actually reaching them. It's about finding out who you can become in the process of trying to reach them. And so it's good to be audacious. It's good to be bold. And all I ask for you is response to your question in terms of what I would hope is included is some audacity to be as bold as this problem is big, and to recognize 3 fundamental things. That localism is determinative, that the time value of money is profoundly significant, particularly in a time of economic uncertainty, and that partnerships must be formed. And the only way partnerships can be advanced is if we incentivize each other for good behavior, not bad behavior. At the end of the day, everything that did and did not happen in this legislative session, any legislative session, is predictable based upon the incentive structures. And so any fundamental success in this space is creating the atmosphere and conditions where we're incentivized to get things done in partnership with local communities and local leadership that aligns the incentives so that we are held to account by each other, ultimately will be held to account by the public. But this is, there's no greater importance in terms of topic in this state. And I just want to, I know this is the last formal question, I'll get to the next, but I just want to thank you. And the reason I took the time from a pandemic and wildfires, which wildfires I'm going to get right back to talk about this is not gone away in terms of our frame of focus and our resolve as an administration. And we're building more talent in this space. You mentioned 4 individuals. We're building even stronger team. And I'm putting together next year's budget. I'm already in the process of putting it together. This is front and center. And I look at what happened the last 48 hours as an opportunity to build some real momentum in the next weeks and months, and certainly into the new calendar year, because we mean business in this respect, and I'm looking forward to the work we do together. And thank you for getting 540 people, not just on this call, but thousands more that I know are part of your extraordinary coalition.
Thank you for that, Governor. All right, let's see if we can dive into a question from the audience. I think we're gonna have time for literally one, unless you wanna do like, we could do a power round. You can just do really quick answers. All right, here we go. Let's see. All right, let's do this one. Governor has outlined many policy proposals over the past 2 years that would help produce housing, but as we all know, many of these have considerable opposition from a variety of interest groups. How do you propose we actually turn these into reality?
I mean, at the end of the day, everybody's good at saying what they're against. Everybody's good at tripping other people up. Everyone's good at putting sand in the gears of progress. That's just obvious. I've seen that for 10 plus years as lieutenant governor up here and now governor. And people's ability to muck things up is legendary. You know, I don't know what point of what pride we all have in that, because at the end of the day, you know, look around. People are really anxious right now about this state. You know, people are worried. You know, they're worried about this pandemic. They're worried about their rents. They're worried about their kids back into school. They're worried about the future of this state. This is serious stuff. And I think, you know, with respect, I don't want to come across as indignant, but I'm losing a little bit of patience with some of the normalcy of the routinization of opposition to a lot of progress. And so we're going to get a little more stubborn in this space. We're going to have to block and tackle a little bit more aggressively. You got to master. Look, I'm not naive about any of this. People say, oh, you didn't get all this done last year. You know, it's been decades. A lot of stuff didn't get done for a reason. They were hard to do. Governor Brown, a master of his craft, had a hard time getting a lot of this stuff done, some of the streamlining and everything else. Some they didn't even attempt. We're going to increase the number of tries. We're going to fall short, perhaps, in many cases, but we're going to have to continue to use our muscle, power of our moral authority. We'll use our formal authority. We'll use more levers. This was a tough year. This pandemic hit us all hard, and we're still in the middle of it. Remember, we haven't even gone through the second wave, and so we'll work our way through this. We'll get out with the kind of resilient mindset that only California can. But know this: we're going to be equally aggressive as we were last year and this year to the task, and we're going to make progress. We're going to be more stubborn, and all I ask in answering your question is you continue to put the pressure on all of us, because the answer to the question, more specifically, forget everything I just said, that was a preamble to the answer. The answer to that question is simple: create the political will, create the conditions where people do the right thing, because they don't have a choice but to do the right thing. And they don't have a choice because it's not in their political or professional interest not to do the right thing. As long as people have an out to doing the right thing, and as long as it's in their political interest to not do the right thing, they'll do it. So our job, and the answer to the question is, create the dynamic, create the conditions where people are compelled to find their better angels, compelled to do the right thing, compelled at the end of the day to make progress, not just make a point, and not just find their way into expressing how influential they are, but how important they can be in the collective cause that is the state of California, that needs leadership at every damn level to elevate this debate, so we can elevate people that are struggling in this state because they can't afford to live in this damn state. So again, the indignity came out, but my pride in this state, I hope, also has come out, because I care about this damn place, not as a governor, as a future ex-governor, that's a guy with 4 kids that cares about my community, cares about this damn state, cares about every part of the state, and by the way, cares about all these constituencies that have expressed themselves favorably and unfavorably. I care about them as well, but I care about this state. And if we care about this state, I care about you and the work you're doing. So let's just end on that. thank you for this
All right.
vision. Thank you for your work, and thank you. I know you want to kick me off.
I don't. I would sit here all day at the table
Thoughts.
with you if we could. So I will let that be the last question. We have some incredible questions from the audience, and we look forward to following up with your office and see if we can get answers. But I do want to thank you for spending this time and recognizing this is part of our collaboration. This time we spent together and that we spent with our audience. We recognize we have a whole lot of work ahead of us, and we can build a better future for all Californians if we work together. And I think that's been a resonant theme for you and me today. At the start of the session, I mentioned that our theme for this conference is Our Homes, Our Voice, Our California. Own the past, transform the future. We talked about our past and our future, and I want to take a moment just to talk about homes. Home is a place of safety and comfort. And that concept holds true for each of us and the people we care about. When we consider what this state has faced historically, plus we've got the pandemic, we've got wildfires, and we've got a need to focus on racial injustice, we're really feeling the need for that safe space, a place we call home. So I appreciate everything you had to share today, Governor Newsom, for sharing your thoughts on where we are and what's next, your commitment to working together to make this a reality. And I just want to note, again, from James Baldwin, he so eloquently stated, in this country, not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. We stand ready to face these changes with you, to make them happen, because they are possible. I believe together we can make them probable. And I extend my very best wishes on behalf of our whole community. And thank you for the work that you've done with the fires, with the pandemic, and all the challenges we face together. And I believe together we can create a California with homes, health, and prosperity for all. Thank you.
Well stated. Very grateful. Thank you for everything. Thanks for all your good work.
Thank you. Take
care.
Bye. And now it is my honor and pleasure to turn the next part of our kitchen table talks over to David Howden, my esteemed colleague, board member, and co-conspirator, as I invite him to the table to discuss, develop the next rich kitchen table talk with our Chris Martin and our legislative housing champions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon. I'm David Howden, Director of the Los Angeles Program for the Corporation for Supportive Housing and a proud member of Housing California's Board of Directors. CSH is honored to be a strategic policy partner with Housing California, and as such, I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished speakers, both true affordable housing champions. First, we have Assemblymember David Chu, representing the 17th District, covering the eastern half of San Francisco, where he has lived since the mid-1990s. Assemblymember Chu came to Assembly from the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, including serving an unprecedented 3 terms as its president. Elected to Assembly in 2014, he serves as chair of the Housing Committee. There he has championed priorities such as rental assistance in the federal stimulus and a moratorium on COVID-19 related evictions, easing restrictions for by right development of affordable homes, a needs and gaps assessment of homelessness to increase collaboration, coordination, and communication among stakeholders, and a new permanent supportive housing program for Medi-Cal beneficiaries, and a permanent expansion of the state low-income housing tax credit. We're thrilled you're here and share your insight and experience. We also have Senator Scott Wiener, also representing San Francisco, as well as parts of northern San Mateo County. As chair of the Senate Housing Committee, he is known for bold, innovative ideas to build affordable homes and end homelessness. He has championed building affordable homes near where residents work, go to school, and access public transit, abolishing zoning that limits a parcel to just one single-family home so more neighbors can enjoy the beautiful neighborhoods largely reserved for overwhelmingly white, wealthy families. Requiring cities, many of which have not a single facility to help Californians experiencing homelessness, to zone for and approve shelters near services. And he joins Assemblymember Chu, working to help renters stay in their homes while we fight COVID-19. We're thrilled you're here and to share your big ideas and give us an update on the legislature's comings and goings, especially during this unprecedented time. Last, I'm pleased to introduce Chris Martin, who has served as Housing California's legislative advocate on homelessness for the past 3 years. Chris has worked directly with both Senator Wiener and Assemblymember Chu on a number of sponsored bills and is a key partner to our CSH legislative champion on homelessness, Sharon Rapport, in the Capitol. I'm also thrilled to note that Housing California recently promoted Chris to policy director, so congratulations, Chris. And after that exceedingly brief introduction, I will hand it over to Chris, who's going to curate the kitchen table talk with our esteemed legislative leaders. Take it away, Chris.
Great, thanks, David. I am excited to be here with both Senator Wiener and Assemblymember Chu to begin a discussion around 2020 and the wild ride it has been getting to this point where we are today. I want to first start by thanking you both for being here with us, especially considering not 48 hours ago, you were in the final day of session and obviously a late Monday night with a lot happening. So really want to appreciate your being here, as I'm sure you have a lot of sleep to catch up on in the coming days. And so I know you both have a lot of priorities this year and appreciate you joining us at this time. I'd also like to thank you both for all your work over this year and previous years to address the needs of those struggling the most. As David Howden mentioned, my colleagues and I have had the pleasure of working with you both on many bills, including Senator Wiener. I worked with you on SB 918 a couple years back, prioritizing a population that we're really passionate about serving, homeless youth. And with Assemblymember Chu on my first bill that I had the honor of working on, AB 74, which provided supportive housing to people experiencing homelessness that are Medi-Cal beneficiaries, as well as this year working on AB 3269 and 2329, and working to create a mandate for local jurisdictions to address homelessness. And most recently, having the pleasure of working with both of you on AB 1845 to create an office to end homelessness, which Assemblymember Chu co-authored and Senator Wiener graciously floor managed in the Senate. So appreciate you both for that as well. We also appreciate your advocacy and leadership of chairs of the Senate and Assembly Housing Committees every legislative year to make progress in addressing housing and homelessness, and look forward to continuing that work together. Our state has faced an enormous challenge as it relates to housing affordability and homelessness before COVID, but further exacerbated by this pandemic. And now we're seeking ways to tackle these needs and support a sense of dignity for all Californians while working against the backdrop of a pandemic. Profound moments of recognizing racial injustice and, of course, wildfires raging across our state. We are all here because we believe we can create this positive change, and it's why Housing California is co-leading our California Roadmap Home Initiative to pursue bold legislative reforms with you and with other legislative leaders. And we're especially interested to hear about your vision and specific actions to take to make that change possible. So with that, my first intro question for you for warming up is 2020 has, of course, been a year that has forced our state to make some challenging decisions, facing unprecedented crises, a $54 billion budget shortfall, eviction cliffs for thousands, hundreds of thousands of Californians. Looking back on the year, what would each of you say are achievements that you'd highlight, either legislatively or budgetarily? And what do you think will be the big themes as we move into 2021, and or anything you'd like to highlight that maybe didn't make it through in this legislative cycle that you're hoping to work on next year?
We're trying to decide who can describe what happened in the last few weeks. Well, I'm not one to, first of all, thank you for having me, and my own Assembly member, Mr. Chu. It's been a real pleasure to work with Housing California and the broad coalition that it represents. This year, we worked very closely on SB 899 to allow 100% affordable housing on church and other nonprofit-owned land. And it was sort of a challenging situation in terms of tension with labor, but I really appreciate the collaboration. And this is an incredibly important organization, and I look forward to continuing that work in the future. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The legislature failed on housing this year. To be clear, there were some good bills that made it through. We had a good density bonus bill that got through. We got a good housing element bill from Buffy Wicks that got through. We got through the eviction moratorium that Assemblyman Chu authored and I co-authored. It was not nearly as strong as any of us wanted it to be, but it is far better than the cliff that we were about to face as of, about now. And there were a couple other good bills as well, including the one you mentioned about the Office to End Homelessness. But I'll be honest that we had the opportunity this year to have a very strong and robust housing year. And for a variety of reasons, some understandable in terms of the tension with labor, that's an issue that has to be resolved, but some other less legitimate kinds of issues. We had not a total collapse, but largely a collapse. And when you look at the number of housing bills that were killed in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, including Assembly bills that were killed there, my own SB 902 that was killed there, a couple of David's bills that were killed in Senate Appropriations Committee, a major Senate housing bill that was killed in the Assembly Local Government Committee, and then two major housing bills by the President of the Senate, Senator Atkins, who's a real housing champion, that were brought up on the Assembly floor so late that it was physically impossible for us to concur in their passage by midnight in the Senate. And so I'm just, I don't want to be a sort of a negative Nelly because I'm a very optimistic person. And I'm still optimistic, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the legislature did not do what it needed to do this year on some very good bills that really should be on the governor's desk right now. But with that said, this was a very tough year for many, many different reasons. And we had a weird session. It was sort of stop and start, limited time for committees, and that created some real problems. I normally hate double referrals of bills to two committees, but I actually started appreciating that more this year because that gives you more opportunity to continue to work through the details of bills and get things done in a timely way. So it was very, very hard. And I do know that we are all deeply committed to coming right back next year on some of the bills that died this year, bringing them back. I'll be bringing SB 902 back. We are committed to working with labor and the affordable housing community over the recess so we can come back with SB 899 and have a unified front to get that passed. And we have to do zoning reform. We have to do zoning reform. We are never going to fix our housing crisis if we continue to ban apartment buildings and affordable housing in the vast majority of California by saying you can only build single family homes. We tried it with SB 50 and we made a lot of progress with that coalition. Then the Pro Tem tried it with SB 1120. I apologize, I have a landline and it is ringing right now, so sorry about that. Hold on one second.
I can't believe Scott Wiener still has a landline.
I have a landline. I'm archaic. I'm sorry. And it's really loud. Senator Atkins, a little humor under a difficult situation. Senator Atkins, with SB 1120 tried. And so we have to get zoning reform done. And I think we're going to take another hard run next year. And then I will also say we need to do more on streamlining. And we've gotten a lot of good momentum on streamlining. We were able to pass SB 35 3 years ago. And that bill is paying huge dividends right now. In San Francisco alone, 1,600 units of affordable housing are being streamlined by SB 35 as we speak. That's just San Francisco, and it's spreading around the state. And we need to expand that and build on that. And then the last thing I just want to say is, as we're going through the RENA process now, as you know, and because we were able to pass SB 828, Southern California had its housing allocation tripled, and it was painful, but we now have Beverly Hills going from a RENA allocation of 2 units to 3,000 units and other cities following suit. We are now going through the RENA process in the Bay Area. It's probably going to be about 2.5 times increase, and we have to, and that's the regional housing needs allocation where the state assigns every city in the state a number of how many market rate, moderate, low income, very low income units you are supposed to produce in the next 8 years. We have to watch that carefully and be part of it and make sure that cities are not, through politics, shirking their responsibility to build housing. So challenging year. We're getting a few good things done this year, but we punted effectively a lot of that work to next year, and I look forward to working with everyone to make it happen.
Well, I will chime in. First, let me just start by saying, hello, Housing California. Hello, Housers. Just appreciate everything you guys are doing around the state. And I'm going to start by just reminiscing to my very first Housing California conference in my first year in the legislature. I had an opportunity to address you. And I said something to the effect of, when I first came to the Capitol, there were very few people who were focused on housing, because at that time, the sense of a housing crisis had not yet taken root in the entire state. But when I walked into that huge ballroom that you guys were having your conference in, I said something to the effect of, I don't feel alone, because we are all housers. And certainly being joined by my great colleague, Scott Wiener, 2 years later, but in particular, fast forward 4 or 5 years, there is now a common mission and vision within the legislature that we've got to do more when it comes to the housing crisis, to our homelessness crisis, to our eviction crisis, to all the things that we care about. So that is good and that is positive. I have to agree with Scott that this was not the year that we wanted it to be. At the beginning of this year, Governor Newsom talked about how we were going to tackle homelessness, and there are a bunch of bills that were introduced in that space, and only a handful have limped over the final line. At the beginning of this year, both in the Assembly and the Senate, we said this is going to be the year of production. There were 6 or 7 bills in both houses that actually crossed the Rubicon into each other's respective houses, and only literally, I think, 3 got across the final line and are sitting on Governor Newsom's desk. Things happened, and I would attribute it in part to the crisis, to what Senator Wiener said before about all the tremendous challenges that we had this year with the stop and go legislature. You guys have been reading the newspapers, the inner house and political challenges we had just generally in trying to get things done. But I would also say there were things that we can work on. I think it's no secret that we know that there were some differences of opinion between the building trades and labor and the affordable housing community on a number of bills. That is something that I think we need to work on. There obviously continues to be this sort of YIMBY-NIMBY debate about communities that don't want to build and feel a lot of resistance and hesitance around doing that. There still is a lot of demonization of low-income communities and communities of unhoused individuals that we still need to overcome. But that being said, there were a couple things that we did get done. Housing California led the fight to make sure that, unlike almost every other area of policy, housing was the one area when it came to the budget that did not get completely decimated by the $54 billion budget deficit. We essentially held our ground for affordable housing funding, for homelessness funding, et cetera. And then I just want to thank all of you that were rooting for a solution when it came to this eviction crisis that has come about as a result of the pandemic, and the fact that we were staring at the abyss of potentially over 5 million Californians who had not paid rent in some way over the past 6 months, who might have been looking at an eviction notice right as we speak, but for the bill that we just passed. And just appreciate you guys being part of the coalition to get our bill done. As Scott said, it certainly wasn't what I wanted to be as we were fighting at the negotiation table for tenants, but the alternative of doing nothing was just catastrophic, and we were able to get something done. That being said, I know we're going to talk about it. It's easy to chalk up the challenges we've had this year to the pandemic, to the recession, to the wildfires, and to the structural conversations around racism. But I would submit, and maybe we can talk about this afternoon, all 4 of those things are exacerbated, highlighted by the housing crisis. So when people aren't housed, we spread pandemic. When people don't have jobs, they get pushed out onto the streets. When entire communities burn down, the houses burn down. And we all know who is being housed or not housed when it comes to our communities of color. And I would submit, while these are all crises that are putting an enormous burden and challenge in front of us to solve, they also do create the opportunity for us to make our case to the public that we have to solve it and create, I think, the space and the reality of a crisis that has to be solved, and from which opportunities for interesting and important policy matters to move through. So looking forward to the conversation, but hopefully some of that made sense. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight, it was a crazy year, but you both stayed steadfast in your commitment. And so I do want to highlight that to addressing housing and homelessness, and kept that commitment all year. As you mentioned, through the budget process this year, we had strong allocations to housing and homelessness. The low-income housing tax credit got funded again. We had, a great movement in terms of Project Home Key and the HAP allocation to address homelessness. So I do want to kind of mention that, it was a crazy year, and despite the circumstances, you both stayed very true to your commitments to addressing the housing affordability and homeless crises. So just want to say that as well. So our state has a reputation for innovative and bold thinking, and you're both known for making audacious proposals over piecemeal approaches. Assemblymember Chu, you've sponsored legislation eliminating the mortgage interest deduction for homeowners on their second homes to pay for homelessness needs, permanently expanding the state low-income housing tax credit program, and then, most recently mandating a homeless gaps and needs analysis and the very ambitious AB 3269 so that we can have a comprehensive statewide strategy. And of course, Senator Wiener, you need no introduction when it comes to bold proposals that really turn heads and make people start thinking. When you run into opposition from your colleagues on these big ideas, you probably get a lot of jaws dropping and eyebrows hitting the roof. But when you present these bold ideas, how do you change the minds of people in the face of opposition? What lessons can advocates learn from you? What lessons have you learned? And just how do you overcome kind of the pushback that you receive when thinking so boldly and so forwardly?
Oh, okay. Well, I think there's two parts to it. The first is convincing your colleagues that it's the right policy. And that is, member to member, sitting down, staff to staff, advocates, just getting them on board so that they understand what the policy is, what the rationale is for it, and why it makes sense. But that's only step one. Then you have to try to create the political atmosphere where it's possible for people to vote for it. So on SB 50, for example, which we worked on for over 2 years and its various iterations, we built a mega massive diverse coalition. I mean, pages and pages of supporters, groups that rarely work together, that were all linked arms on this. And so whenever a colleague who maybe hasn't done a lot of housing work comes to me and says, hey, I'm looking to do a housing bill, I have an idea, who should I ask for support? I say, look at the SB 50 support list and start from there. And so we've been able to parlay that when we do other housing bills. We start by literally blasting that list and saying, hey, here's an idea. If you're interested, if you want to support, let us know. And having that kind of coalition is incredibly important to create the political space so that members feel like, okay, I support this policy and I feel like I'll have cover if I actually vote for it. When people come at me, I have something to fall back on. Now, the one thing that I think we need to be better at when it comes to pro-housing legislation is to be more nimble in terms of the grassroots organizing to generate grassroots support, but also when having to do things like sort of almost like a political campaign, running issue ads, doing things to to generate that kind of support. And that did happen in SB 50, but it probably wasn't at the scale that we needed it to happen. I think we all learned a lot from that, and we saw it with with SB 899 when things sort of went off the rails a little bit, and labor started coming at me and running digital ads, and it's okay, I'm a big boy, I can handle it. But you know, I think it was a learning experience for the housers to say, hey, we have to be able to step up and run our own ads and our own campaigns and generate grassroots enthusiasm. So I think those are sort of the three elements as I see it.
So I will add to it and say that there are many times when the hard ideas just take time. So the very first bill I worked on with the sponsorship of Housing California was a massive expansion of the affordable housing tax credit. In 2015, we sent it to Governor Brown's desk. He vetoed it. I introduced that bill 5 years in a row, and we never got it signed. But finally, through the course of this, Gavin Newsom, the candidate, decided to stick it into his gubernatorial campaign platform. And that was sort of the culmination of a huge amount of work by a lot of people to push that policy idea up to the chain, led by Housing California, such that for the last 2 years, now Governor Gavin Newsom has included $500 million into the affordable housing tax credit. So time with big important ideas is important. I want to just really credit Senator Wiener for this idea that we can think about potentially adding a few more housing units on single family zone places. I have no doubt that at some point we are going to actually move forward on this. It's just a matter of whose ideas come. I think a second thing I'll say is, there are times when the ideas are right, but the time is wrong. But as long as you push the idea at the right moment, things can happen. So for example, in the tenants movement, there has been this idea that that rental debt should not be the basis of an eviction, right? So if someone owes a hospital a lot of money for medical bills, you don't say, we're going to evict you from your home because you didn't pay your bill. If you happen to owe a lot on your credit card, $2,000 on your credit card, the credit card company can't come and evict you from your home. But if you happen to owe your landlord, that debt becomes the basis to kick you out of your home. And that at some levels seems logical. But we had introduced this bill this year during this pandemic to say, at least for the 11-month period that started in March, during this pandemic, we should not automatically evict you. And it was an idea that maybe in a different time wouldn't have worked, but at this time does, and it starts a different kind of conversation. Now, there's much more that we should have done in that bill, but that's what I mean by trying to match the ideas to the moment. The last thing I'm going to say is completely agreeing with Scott, that people power is everything. And for me, what I know when I have a bill that local communities and local activists are pounding on the doors and the phones and the email boxes of our colleagues, that truly is the difference between success or not success. Because it's easy for my colleagues to hear from a donor or from a good friend or from someone who they happen to know why they should kill the bill. It's another thing for them to hear from 100 strangers why they should support a bill. And that's why this is so important, and just continuing to build that grassroots support from a lot of different directions around big, hard ideas. That's ultimately what democratic politics is about.
And this, if I may add, this is, and David's point is a really important one. When SB 1120 ultimately passed, but it was too late to send it back to the Senate for the final vote. But the vote happened, and there was a particular, I will not say, a member of the assembly who was someone who was actually quite pro-housing and amazing on many, many levels, one of my favorite colleagues, who did not support SB 1120 and was getting just dragged on Twitter by the supporters, the YIMBYs who were supporting SB 1120. And even though I was not happy that my colleague was getting dragged, because this colleague is overwhelmingly, on the right side of housing issues, and I'm going to try to help. The other part of me was like, okay, at least people are finally seeing that there is another world out there. It's not just all the NIMBYs, and all these people who are just opposed to everything and are so vocal. And it can seem like, during SB 50, I had a colleague in the assembly saying, no one in my district supports SB 50. And I said to this colleague, that is not true. I guarantee you have plenty of people who support it, but they're not the ones who are showing up at your town halls and yelling at you and calling your office. But so we have, I think, whether it's on affordable housing issues or density or whatever, we have more and more people who are getting vocal, and members are hearing from them.
Absolutely. Well, So this is a fun one. So as you know, Housing California is partnering with advocates and experts from essential sectors across the state to drop a roadmap home to holistically address California's housing and homelessness crisis. So if I was to hand you each a wand and you get to create one large scale solution, of course, we'd love to be able to do more, but if you could choose just one solution that you would add to this roadmap, what would it be? And don't be afraid to go large, because when I asked this question earlier, I said make housing an entitlement and a human right. So start big.
I would say at this moment to use as economic stimulus that we figure out how to fund and streamline the production of enough housing to house every homeless person in California. And to basically say to the trades in the affordable housing world, we're going to put a lot of people to work building this housing so we can house every single person and have that be our goal that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for in the next couple of years during this recession. That would be my big idea.
I would say mine would be to, if we can truly create the complete pro-housing coalition, we get a little fragmented. You have the equity advocates, and you have the YIMBYs, and you have labor, and you have like people who are, we're all on the same team. We all want overwhelmingly so many of the same things. And if we can actually perfect that coalition and say all of us are, we're all in this together, and let's come up with a shared agenda and agree that we're all going to demand all of it, that will be so powerful. And in particular, we have to resolve this dispute with labor. It's a dispute that should not exist. Affordable housing, labor, it's all part of the Grand Progressive Coalition. We're all part of the same family. We all want affordable housing. We all want construction workers who can live good middle-class lives. But in a way, what happened with SB 899, when we had to pull it back because of the tension between the affordable housing world and labor, it was not pretty. It was not fun. It's super painful as you're going through it. I know more than anyone. But in a way, I'm glad that the question was finally called because you have two sort of parties that have been sort of, unhappy with each other for about probably 20 plus years now. And finally, hopefully we can now resolve this, because if we can all link arms, we can just move pretty much any piece of legislation through the legislature, and it'll help at the local level as well.
Great. Well, we'll make both of this happen next year then? Is that what's going to happen?
We're going to fix it all next year, David and I.
Do it.
Well, we'll be here to support you both. So the last question before I turn to the Q&A is really, obviously, COVID has had a significant impact on the legislative session. It impacted the budget. It impacted the way the state did business, the way people could interact with the state and the legislature, and has forced the state to make some tough decisions. So I'm curious how COVID impacted the work you did, how you do it, as well as what it made you prioritize in the wake of this pandemic and the crisis around racial equity and racial justice that we're seeing play out across our country. Yeah.
Well, I'll start by saying that I basically didn't sleep for the last month trying to land this deal to figure out how to do an eviction moratorium for individuals who have been who've lost their income because of COVID. And we were able to put effectively a 5-month transitional policy in place. But we're going to be right back at this in January, trying to figure out what do we do. We've effectively deferred a lot of evictions until the beginning of February, but it begs the question, unless there's a vaccine that comes along and the recession ends and people are back to work, we're going to have to figure this out. So I'm going to mention that and then suggest this as the topic for the fall. California was decimated with a $54 billion budget deficit. And I would like to submit to Housing California and all housers out there that we've got to find our own permanent source of funding to do the work that we want to do. It's been an ongoing kind of passion project of mine. We had some breakthroughs a couple years ago with SB2 and SB3, but I think we've got to go big if we're going to get home. And I'd like to be in conversations with you guys through the fall to figure out what are we going to do, what's the multi-billion-dollar plan during this time period, knowing that these discussions around revenues are hard, but how do we paint that vision that we need to actually make sure we're going to house everybody? And I would also say it probably is going to have to be part and should be part of a larger bargain of how we streamline and build more market rate housing and build more housing in single family communities, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that is going to be part of an equation that I'm interested in thinking about, and whether we could, if I were to get votes to eliminate the second vacation home mortgage interest deduction, I could establish today bonding capacity for $4 billion worth of funding. And I don't think anyone today, there's no elected official probably, I hope, that will defend that right publicly, that people during this pandemic and recession and wildfire time should get a tax break on their second vacation home. But to Scott's point, we've just got to lock arms and figure out how to do it and have the conversations right now so we're prepared in 3 months, 4 months to get it going.
I think COVID, there's nothing good about COVID. Everything is horrible about COVID. But one thing that has been at least educational, I won't say good, educational about COVID is it has shed a massive spotlight on so many existing inequities in society that many of us were aware of, but in terms of public awareness, people are seeing it, the lack of an adequate social safety net, the lack of support and resources for so many of our frontline workers, the inequities for who's doing essential jobs and exposing themselves, the inequities for who gets laid off first, the inequities in our healthcare system in terms of how Black and Brown communities are treated by the healthcare system, and those disparities, the educational disparities in terms of what remote learning looks like if you're in a wealthier home where you have great internet access and a private room for a kid to learn in versus overcrowded housing and someone expecting a kid with bad internet to learn there. So many inequities, but housing is one of them, and we're seeing it, of course, with the eviction potential disaster if we don't really get it together. And David's bill was a step, but we need to keep bird dogging this, as he just acknowledged. But one issue is we're seeing in terms of infection that overcrowded housing is an issue. That when you have 10 or 15 people living in one home, that is a much higher risk than you have 2 people living in a home. And so that whether it's multiple families living together, multi-generational, and when we don't have enough housing, when we haven't invested enough in housing, we have a broken housing system, people live in overcrowded situations because they have no other choice. And that, we're seeing what some of the consequences are of that. So I think COVID has really, as in so many areas, it's motivated a lot of us to work even harder to address these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first question I want to ask you from the Q&A is kind of related in some respect, but more explicitly kind of getting to the way we do business. So, before COVID, people that weren't necessarily lobbyists had a pretty tough time getting their voices heard in the Capitol, organizing in the Capitol, which surely affects, what gets passed, right? Instead of coming to the legislature in person, they had to navigate weird digital systems now and very confusing and changing rules, as we have all experienced during the committee process here. So how do you envision that playing out in the next year to make the legislature and the legislative process a little bit more accessible as we are sheltering in place, and the implication that has had in your advice for people, making sure their voices are heard. And before we answer, I do want to mention we only have 8 minutes, so we're going to try and do some rapid fire through these few questions because we have a lot of great ones.
Well, I think that the remote public comment, even though it can be frustrating for people, it has allowed more people to participate. And so there's something to be said for that. I am very much looking forward to going back to in-person public hearings. I think that's important for many reasons, and it's just, I think, more productive. But I think that, you know, I think we pivoted pretty elegantly to allow that remote participation. We've had this whole, it's turned into a big drama around remote participation by members of the legislature. And in the Senate, we authorized back in March remote participation and remote voting. We then decided we were going to allow remote voting for members who were at high risk and committees, but not on the floor. Then 10 out of our 11 Republicans decided that they were going to have like an in-person, no mask, indoor gathering for several hours with each other to watch the Republican convention or something. And lo and behold, it turns out one of them tested positive for COVID. So they, you know, did something that they're not supposed to do, violating health orders, and so on. And I don't want to, I'm not into COVID shaming. None of us is perfect. We're all imperfect. But given that we were at the end of session, you know, we all sort of had a responsibility, at least through the end of the session, to really protect ourselves. And so they did that. And so they weren't allowed to come into the Capitol. And we, I think, graciously decided to allow them to participate remotely, rather than in the old days, if someone got smallpox, you don't come in the legislature. They then just used that to completely have a temper tantrum and disrupt our proceedings to the point where numerous bills died because we couldn't get to them in time. So I am more skeptical of the remote participation than I was in the past because we see how it was abused and literally killed bills on Monday.
You know, my quick answer to that is there are ways to show your influence beyond showing up to something physically. So we all know how many emails we're getting on different topics. We know if our phones are ringing off the hooks. We hear it when people call into those hearings. So there really is a way to flex kind of the classic grassroots political muscle into something, you know, letters to the editor. You know, if everyone on this call were to write an op-ed to your local newspaper saying the legislature failed to deliver on housing this year, people will get it. And people will start calling Scott and I and saying, hey, what bills can I introduce to move this forward? I think we do need to create the public perception that we did not get what we were supposed to get done this year. And we're going to have to go back next year. And there should be an expectation by the public that we can actually deliver on important, hard things that address the crisis of the day. So don't think that because we're all sheltering at home, you don't have microphones, because you do.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to quickly go through a couple more if I can. The first is, how can we integrate equity metrics into our housing policy to ensure racial equity and racial justice, and ensure the solution fits the scale of the need, and ensuring marginalized communities have meaningful decision-making power and continuous input in the process.
So I'm going to jump in for a second on that. I've been saying privately that the housing movement needs to take a complementary approach in a post-George Floyd world to really highlight the fact that the systems of racism that we've been talking about in the criminal justice world are just as apparent in the housing world. When you have, you know, more than half of all Latinos and African Americans who are reporting significant financial strain due to housing costs, when we have a 6% African American population, but a 40% African American population within our homeless Californians, when 3/4 of our rental households who have had job loss due to COVID are households of color, we have not, I think, done an effective job at highlighting those disparities and adding to the vision that housing for everyone is a moral right, is a human right, is a civil right, and taking it up a notch. Because the debate up to now has been one about policy and one about, you know, how are we going to fix RENA and CEQA and acronyms and fighting with all of these various interests, as opposed to saying fundamentally, there is a moral obligation we have to put a roof over everyone's head so they're not exposed to the elements and they're not exposed to coronavirus. And I feel like we're almost at that point of making that moral case to Californians, but we're not quite there yet. So I'd submit we need to do more of that.
I would just say that on so many of these issues around housing that seem very controversial based on the sometimes self-selecting and not very representative sample of who's contacting legislators. When you poll people, it's not controversial. Like we had a few years ago, there was someone who moved Assemblyman in Santiago from LA had a fair housing law. I'm assuming that Housing California was strongly supporting of it to try to require more sort of fair housing analysis during the housing element process. That bill, it's one of those bills you're like, of course, but it was really, really hard to get that through the legislature, and it had to be watered down somewhat. You poll that probably polls at 80%, and it's true of so many of these issues.
Well, I think I can ask one last question just because I see it and I'd be selfish not to ask this one. So respect to RENA and zoning, how do we hold cities accountable for land use approvals and facilitating production, including lower income where we are particularly falling short of RENA goals without penalizing them responsible for weak market conditions that they don't control?
Well, I think we've done a lot of work around accountability. So SB 35 is keyed off of RENA. If you are falling short of your RENA housing goals at different income levels, you become streamlined. And so because almost no cities meet their low-income housing goals, pretty much SB 35 streamlines low-income, very low-income, extremely low-income housing, essentially in all of California. And market rate is I think half or 60% of cities don't meet their market rate. And so SB 35 puts some real teeth into RENA. And in addition, we strengthened the Housing Accountability Act, which I like to refer to as don't change the rules in the middle of the game law. That if you have set the zoning and the design standards and all of the objective criteria, when someone comes forward and says, I'm proposing based on your rules, you have to approve it. You can't say, well, we know we said we zoned it for 20 units. We're only going to let you have 12, no more. And we put teeth into that law.
I think for me, what I would say is the opposition, and let's refer to it as sort of the NIMBY opposition, they see something like RENA and they go all crazy. But it's the broader public that may not know what the four-letter RENA acronym stands for, may not exactly understand this. I think, again, it just comes down to sort of framing the issue in the right way and trying to explain to people that a bill that would change, that would split single-family sites into lots or duplexes, it shouldn't be scary. And trying to explain to people that we're trying to create a place so that you're not paying through the nose for your spot and you're building enough housing for your kids to be able to continue to live in the community that they grew up in for the future. And part of it is around sort of getting beyond the acronym and moving to sort of the bigger vision of where we're going. I also think that a lot of communities, both Scott and I served in local government, and most of our colleagues did. And as local government, city councilors and supervisors, it's easy to forget that there's a bigger world beyond whatever small city you represent. And helping to understand that every micro decision of every city has a ripple effect on every other city in a region. And so the collective decisions that people are making to not build is having a horrific impact on our cost of living, our quality of life, our commutes, our congestion, and our cost of housing. And again, just sort of repainting the picture so that people get it beyond the acronyms. I think we've actually done a great job. Scott has led on a lot of RENA reform. We've done a much better job such that there are now a lot of significant requirements that local jurisdictions are going to have to figure out. Now's where the rubber will literally meet the road. But just helping to paint that picture of the future is not so scary when you actually build a little housing and when everyone gets a roof on their heads, and just keep pounding on that message in a way that our constituents around the states can understand.
Yeah, I want to thank you both for that. And thank you both to Assemblymember Chu and Senator Weiner for joining us today for this important dialogue, and for your leadership in advancing state policies to create a California with homes, health, and prosperity for all. I'm looking forward to next year and working with you both again and in the years to come. So for those who attended the previous session, already heard that the California Housing Consortium is co-hosting today's session with us as we focus on changing policies. CHC is a critical partner of ours, co-leading our legislative and budgetary advocacy in Sacramento. But before we end this critical day on advancing systems change and structural reform, we have a few quick reminders for the unconference attendees. We look forward to your participation in day 4. Tomorrow, our sessions will focus on shifting and building power for sustainable impact. You won't want to miss incredible sessions, including our closing keynote address with Glenn Harris, the president of Race Forward. And don't forget to participate in the 9 a.m. networking activity tomorrow, the coffee and a conversation. Learn more, register in advance in the networking activities banner in Workcast, our virtual event platform. So thank you again to Assemblymember Chu and Senator Weiner.
Thank you.
And we will see you all tomorrow. Thanks.
Go Housing California.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thank you.